You're listening to The Interactome, a podcast by a group of young researchers who want to connect you to the world of science by sharing their stories and perspectives. Just in case their bosses are listening, they want to remind you that the opinions expressed here are their own. They also want to remind you not to take anything they say as medical or professional advice, as they are not doctors. Not yet, anyway. Stay tuned about that. And, without further ado, welcome to the Interactome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Interactome. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah, and we have Maia with us.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to hear all of you listening to our podcast again.
We have a special guest, Dr. Shawna Pandya, this time on the Interactome, and I'll let her introduce herself because she holds a lot of titles.
Yay! Thank you for being on the show, Shawna.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Maya, for having me. It is my absolute pleasure to be here. So as you correctly said, what I do depends on the day. So I like to say that my life is like a box of medical chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So on any given day, I can be in a rural emergency room, serving as the only physician in a small town. I can be found running the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences Space Medicine Group. We're teaching a space medicine class. I do a lot of research. I work as the VP of Immersive Medicine for Luxonic Technologies, which leverages immersive technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality for diagnostic imaging, everywhere from supporting astronaut health and remote populations on Earth. I am also an aquanaut, and most recently, I've been named Canada's first commercial female astronaut. So I think we'll have a lot to chat about today. At least I hope so.
Congratulations!
Yes.
That's so amazing.
So
wow, so exciting.
Yeah.
It's so good to see more female astronauts, and especially more female astronauts from other countries. So I'm very, very excited to hear about your announcement and just to hear more about you in general and really get to know you. Because this is also the first time I've really sat down and spoken to you. So
yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Definitely we need more women in space. 11 to 12% of all astronauts have been women so far, and we definitely need to see more women. Once I go to space, I will be Canada's fourth female astronaut overall, so following after Roberta Bondar, Julie Payette, and Jenny Fidey.
Wow, that is so exciting. Yeah, I am just so jazzed because I've never spoken to anyone really in the space field, let alone an astronaut to be. So I'm just so excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, I'm excited to be here, so this will be great.
Thank you so much. So I guess to start off, we would love to hear about your path into becoming an astronaut. Kind of like what is the selection process like, and what made you decide to pursue this route?
Yeah, so I think having a role model to look up to really helped with that. So I was a child of the 90s, and I watched Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, become an astronaut and be the first Canadian woman in space, and thought, hey, we can do that. So I just thought, okay, to do what she does, I just need to follow her path and be a neuroscientist, a physician, and then an astronaut. And, that's literally what drove me to pursue studying honors neuroscience in undergrad. It's what drove me to pursue medical school, and the space dream was always there. And so actually right before medical school, I heard of this place called the International Space University, and they had a master's program. And, I realized that, hey, med school is really competitive. I know incredible candidates who aren't even getting interviews. I need a contingency plan that would also help further my goals if I don't get into med school. And to my shock, I actually got into both the International Space University and the medical school. And that was the first time I had to make a really good, hard decision. And, I thought, well, the least I can do is ask, right? If the School of Medicine says, no, you applied for medicine in this year and you have to come in this year, or do not reapply next year, I'll face that. But the least I can do is ask. And to my surprise and good fortune, they really believed in the master's program, thought it sounded like a great opportunity. And, I really learned the power of just asking, right? It costs very little to ask. And so I went off to Strasbourg, France to pursue my master's in the International space university, and it was like a year at Starfleet Academy. It was working with 51 students from 30 countries. And we represented every discipline from engineering to geology. I was the token life sciences and the health person, and we spanned countries from Canada, US, India, Nigeria, Mexico. Like, we were very global. And that's kind of really when I realized that this whole field of space medicine existed, that, most of the time you hear those terms and you think, why are they in a sentence together, until you realize that the spaceflight environment is trying to kill you. And it's actually can be either quite hazardous to human health or at least lead to some interesting physiological adaptations. And we can talk more about that later, but it was just really cool to see that there was a place for my discipline and my niche in an interest in space. And one of the faculty there knew of that interest. And as part of the master's program, you do a 3-month internship. And he said, I know you're interested in space health and space medicine. Why don't you apply for an internship at the European Astronaut Center, which is a division of the European Space Agency? And I thought that sounded really cool. So I did. I went ahead and did that and got to spend a summer working with the Crew Medical Support Office for the European Astronaut Corps down in Cologne, Germany. And that was just a very interdisciplinary place. You dealt with the flight surgeons, the physiologists, the biomedical engineers, like just a really welcoming place. And that really kind of, that would really solidify that, hey, this is something that I really, really want to be a part of my career. So by the time I got into medical school, I really didn't want to lose that. And so it really had me looking out for opportunities or creating my own where they didn't exist. So for example, I would give lunchtime lectures on what I knew on space medicine. I started up the school's Space and Extreme Environment Medicine Club. I would go to conferences and look for papers, look for subject areas I could research and present on that would both cater to my interest in space health and global health and austere environments, and was actually invited to turn my first paper into a book chapter, which as a medical student is an incredible opportunity. So by the time I got to my 4th year of medical school, I was finally in a position where I could apply for another opportunity that I had my eye on since high school. And it was the first time since I heard about it 10 years prior that I would be qualified to actually apply for the aerospace medicine elective at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And at that time, the Canadian Space Agency would pick a handful of qualified medical students to go down to NASA for a month and, complete a project and learn all about aerospace medicine. And it was like just being a kid in space medicine Disneyland, being down there. So I was one of 2 Canadians selected for that year. And it was just an incredible time meeting with incredible mentors and people from all parts of the JSC offices, from astronaut MDs to scientists to rehab specialists to nutritionists. So, that really set the path. And then along the way, I got a few qualifications in wilderness medicine. For example, attending the National Outdoor Leadership School's Wilderness Upgrade Medical Provider course, getting involved with first the Wilderness Medical Society and then the World Extreme Medicine Organization, where I serve as a podcast host, a conference host, one of the faculty, and then just always keeping out these opportunities. And then my most recent opportunity, which led to the path towards becoming a commercial astronaut, was joining the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, which I heard about during residency. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but it sounds really interesting. At worst, it could be some version of a science camp for professionals. At best, it could be one step closer to following the commercial path towards research in astronautics. So that was nearly a decade ago. And based on my background and interest in medicine and space medicine, I was asked both to put together a course curriculum, which I still teach to this day every year, and also direct our space medicine group, which has done some really cool projects in human health in space flight, both in orbital, suborbital, and parabolic flight. And as the commercial space sector took off, literally, for Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin both taking off in 2021, the opportunities for going to space and doing research that was both meaningful towards supporting astronaut health in space, as well as supporting human health on Earth, really materialized. And so in November of last year, we launched our first ever research mission in suborbital flight. That was the double ISO-1 research mission. Kelly Girardi was our first astronaut. I was one of the PIs on that mission using a continuous glucose monitor in suborbital flight. And then, you know, the momentum kept going, and before long, a second research flight opportunity was announced. And this time, myself, Kelly from our last flight, and a new astronaut, in fact, Ireland's first astronaut, Dr. Nora Patton, will be part of that crew and will fly as early as 2026. And, you know, it's just the culmination of pretty much a decade's worth of accumulating experience in operations, teamwork, making really good decisions in highly dynamic environments, learning to work really well as a team, looking to fill in the gaps. All of that, you know, it comes with the territory. It comes with just being there, being present, and willing to learn. And it's just incredibly exciting to be here today, saying that, you know, in tears, we're going to fly our research to space.
That's incredible. I have so many questions and just things I want to talk about with you, because there's so many different things that you've just done and studied and have been able to learn. But I do want to start off by maybe talking more about space medicine in general, because I think I've been exposed more to it, but I don't think the general public really knows what it is, or that even you can marry those two fields together. So I guess if you want to talk more about what that is, and then also anything that you wish you knew, if you could go back those years ago and sort of tell yourself any lessons you feel like you've learned along the way for people who might want to get involved in the field.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those who don't know why space and medicine fit together in a sentence, it's pretty much because space is trying to kill you. And so when we talk about the hazards of the spaceflight environment, we kind of talk about the big five, which includes radiation, isolation and confinement, distance from Earth, altered gravity environments, and then just the spaceflight environment. So we call that the RIDGE framework. So the first letters of all of those terms. And so, for example, even at the level of the International Space Station, you know, you're relatively protected from higher energy radiation that stems from galactic cosmic radiation and solar particle events. Much of that is filtered out by the Van Allen belts when you're still at about 400 kilometers or 250 miles above the Earth. But there are a lot of effects from the microgravity environment. Our bones lose density at a rate of 1% to 2% per month without any interventions. Our muscles lose mass, our fluids shift upwards, and this has implications for everything from developing a puffy, rounded moon face appearance to feeling like we're congested. So food needs to be more flavorful, more textured, more spicy up in space in order to be palatable. And then, of course, the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, that's that proteinaceous brain juice that bathes our brains and spines, that doesn't drain in the same fashion in the microgravity environment. And so it results in longer duration spaceflight of over 30 days in pockets of increased ICP or intracranial pressure, particularly around the optic nerves, which exit the backs of our eyes. And in certain astronauts, actually leads to hyperopia or vision changes. So that's a potential showstopper for Mars. So for some of these things, we have countermeasures. So to negate the effects of the bone density loss or the muscle mass loss, for example, astronauts up on the station famously have to perform 2 hours of aerobic and resistive exercise 6 days a week. So those are just examples. So when we talk about spaceflight, there's a lot to mitigate, and at the space agency level, so separate from the commercial path. And so when we talk about space agency routes to going to space, we talk about Canadian Space Agency selections, NASA selections, European Space Agency selections. This starts with selecting the healthiest of the healthy to mitigate any further health hazards from coming up. And then it continues with pre-flight screening, quarantine, and then on flight, we don't have a doctor on station at all times, but we have a crew medical officer with previously up to 60 hours of training. Now it's a bit closer to about 20 hours of training in key medical conditions and procedures that may come up. And then there's also medical kits on station, everything from a defibrillator, which mercifully has never been used in space, to wound care packs, medication packs. So that's kind of how the space agencies approach astronaut health up on the International Space Station. And so now what we need to consider as space medicine evolves tremendously is, well, if we're going talking about the commercial path towards space, that rigorous medical screening isn't necessarily there. And so for something like a shorter duration space flight, which is a same-day mission, it's less of a concern. But we've also seen all civilian orbital flights happen through private missions with SpaceX, with Axiom. So where's the line when health considerations take over on orbital flight? And then back to the space agency side, we see a very real push by the international community to return to the moon and then also use the moon as a test bed. So now how do mission profiles, astronaut selection, health kit, medical kit preparation need to change, considering the extreme case of Mars, for example. So we talked about the distance from Earth. So what that means that depending on the alignment of Earth and Mars, there can be a 3 to 24 minute one-way round trip delay, or sorry, one-way communication delay. So if you have a mass casualty or a catastrophic event on Mars, by the time you say, hey, there's a problem, and then you hear back, that's a 48-minute delay at its worst. And then on top of that, there's a period of time when the sun is between the Earth and Mars, and resulting in a 2 to 3 week communications blackout period. So now you really need to think about increasing the crew's autonomy to both assess, recognize, and treat all types of medical conditions in situ. So that's where principles of austere environment medicine, remote medicine, wilderness medicine become really useful, as well as emerging technologies, everything from 3D printing to genetic engineering. So the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, TRISH, has done some really interesting work with funding lettuce that can also make medication, which sounds like it's sci-fi, but there's folks working on it today. And then even using virtual reality, which is something I do on a day-to-day basis for training, skills maintenance, and diagnostic imaging. So it takes all manner of emerging technologies. AI is another big one, machine learning for diagnostics. So that's kind of the beginner's guide to how space is trying to kill you.
Yeah, I feel like the way that you were describing it, like in the extreme case of like going to Mars, I felt like, oh, it's kind of like the feeling you get when you're watching a space movie and then the astronauts are so like separated from Earth and they're just like kind of on their own. It must be like a real challenge to anticipate like any and all kind of like medical things that could happen and being prepared for whatever could happen when you're so far away from Earth. So it really makes me think about like the different considerations we need to account for like doing medicine in space and like the challenges that come with it. And I would personally love to hear more about like the VR virtual reality things that you're working on to kind of like combat this problem or make it a little better. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So that's actually a really cool origin story. So when we talk about how we prepare for space, we talk about de-risking in Earth-based test beds that somehow reflect aspects of the microgravity or spaceflight environment. So we call them analog environments because they're analogous to some aspect of space. So, there's different examples. There's parabolic flight, more informally called the vomit comet, where you fly up and down and falling at the same rate as your plane gives you 20 seconds of 0G at a time. So I've done 10 such research campaigns. And then another way, NASA does this, and its partner agencies, the Canadian Space Agency, European Space Agency, NASA, the Japanese Space Exploration Agency, and Roscosmos, they all do this as well. And they send their astronauts down to the Aquarius Reef Base to become aquanauts. And they call this the NEMO missions. This is the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations set of missions. So there's a lot of acronyms in medicine and in space, and we're going to probably hear many of them this hour. And so Aquarius Reef Base is a special place. It's about the size of a school bus in the Florida Keys at 60 feet of depth. And basically, prior to being flooded by Hurricane Irene, I think it was, the NASA and its partners would regularly send crews down for 8 to 16 days to both work on the crew cohesion, work on living in an isolated, confined, extreme environment or an ice environment, and to also do really important science and technology demonstrations that would further the technology and experiments for space. And so why do they do that? So if you're a diver, you know that if you're at a certain depth, you have to decompress at a set rate before you can safely surface, lest you risk a dive injury. And so when you're at 60 feet of depth and you're breathing the ambient air pressure for over 24 hours, it's actually 16 hours and 47 minutes before you can safely decompress. And so by comparison, the quickest you can get to definitive medical care on Earth from the International Space Station, from the time you decide to evacuate, is as little as 3 to 6 hours. So you can actually get to Earth quicker from ISS than you can from the Aquarius Reef base. So that's one example of an Aquanaut mission and setting. And so I've done something similar at a different underwater habitat, also in the Florida Keys, which is called the Jules Undersea Lodge. And it is at 22 feet of depth. It's about 13 miles horizontally distant from the Aquarius Reef base. And the principle is similar. You want to build that crew cohesion and advance any space ready space technologies that may one day make it to space flight, and also do some science of physiology in an extreme environment. And so I was lucky enough to be part of the Neptune missions, both in 2019 and 2023 as the crew medical officer. So the first one was a 5-day mission and the second one was a 6-day mission. And like everything else, Neptune is an acronym, stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. So that's a very long way of background for asking about the introduction to virtual reality. So on that first mission, I tested, we partnered with a company called Sonic Technologies, which was a Canadian company that leverages virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality for diagnostic imaging and healthcare training and certification. And so the company has developed the world's first digital twin of the radiology reading room in VR. There's Health Canada certification and FDA approval is currently pending. And so basically the advantages, if you're a radiologist and normally you need to read your images, this requires physical office space. It requires high resolution monitors so that you can read, manipulate, mark up, and ultimately report on your images. So this entire workflow has been virtualized. And so as the career medical officer, I got to slip on this headset underwater and actually meet in this virtual space collaboratively with the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada, over 3,600 kilometers away. And it was a proof of demonstration of a technology advancing its TRL, or technology readiness level, towards spaceflight. So that was a really cool experience. I really enjoyed it. And then a week later, it was a really busy month. We flew that same headset in microgravity on parabolic flight, again, further advancing its TRL. And so the company just does really cool work. They had a few grants by the Canadian Space Agency, so they asked me to come on board as their VP of Immersive Medicine. So I now work with the company, and on our second mission last year, we tested one of the world's first mixed reality point-of-care ultrasound devices. So this again was funded in part by the Canadian Space Agency and the Deep Space Healthcare Challenged by Impact Canada. And the idea is creating next generation technologies that can both positively impact rural and remote care here in Canada, where up to 17 to 20% of our population is rural, as well as supporting astronaut health in an environment that demands that anything we bring with us is low mass, low volume, low cost, low power, easy to use. And so in this case, this mixed reality point of care ultrasound device allows us to see our ultrasound screen right in front of us, kind of floating over our environment and having the same functionality we would have with any handheld ultrasound or bedside ultrasound device. And then lastly, we've also created training modules for astronauts to be able to practice and maintain their physical skills for everything from putting in an IV to assessing a patient to doing more advanced and invasive lines. So it's pretty cool to be part of technology that both supports astronaut health on longer duration missions and in any mission as well as here on Earth.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I feel like the idea is just like so cool that you can essentially get like this like virtual radiology like imaging room or be able like to practice like different medical skills like in a place that's like kind of like isolated and very, very far away from the rest of the world. So is I just wanted to make sure I got the idea right. Is the idea that like let's say for example like we're on a space mission and somebody gets injured, so would the virtual reality kind of like imaging technology, like would that be able to help like a space medical doctor on board kind of like visualize like the scans that they make and make like further
Yeah,
decisions about how to deal with it?
that's a great question. Yeah. So when we talk about diagnostic imaging and that whole pathway, it's so the spectrum looks like a clinician coming in and saying, okay, I need diagnostic imaging to help me with both making a diagnosis as well as guiding my management, and then image capture, whether it's by X-ray or ultrasound, and then putting those images on a secure system that has a recognized architecture that allows us to both securely maintain the patient's data as well as manipulate an image, by which I mean, add an arrow, measure something, change the contrast, and then ultimately report on it. So the part that our virtual reality imaging platform puts in is once an image has been acquired, it allows us to, anything that we would typically need high resolution monitors and a PACS architecture to view and mark up, that's instead replicated in the virtual world on our imaging platform.
Wow,
That's
neat.
super cool. I was gonna say, like, I consistently think about what the future of space travel is going to look like, and the more I think about it, the more I think about collaboration, and not just across teams, but across people internationally and across all these different disciplines that are necessary in order to make a long duration flight successful, especially to something like Mars someday. So I wanted to kind of ask you if you knew of any other technologies that might be kind of cool for listeners to hear about, like the mixed reality or virtual reality, that could help us sort of condense all of our disciplines into this almost shared resource that then we can go very, very far with.
Yeah, every single year is becoming more and more exciting in space medicine. So there's a really great conference. There's many great conferences out there. But the NASA Investigators Workshop is one put on by NASA in Galveston every winter. It's free to attend because it is a government conference, and they highlight research that's been done in the past year that will support astronaut health. And so last year, there was a lot of cool stuff on molecular genetics and stem cells. And then this year, in the era of ChatGPT, there was a whole session on space medicine ChatGPT. So space medicine is changing very, very quickly. And, the stuff that we think is sci-fi is actually happening today. So there's this really cool paper or article in the MIT Review from about 2017, where they talk about engineering the perfect astronaut. And they talk about genetically enhancing an astronaut so they're more radiation resistant. And they talk about splicing in elephant genes, not to make some sort of elephant human hybrid, but to because elephants rarely get cancer because they have so many extra copies of cancer editing genes. And so that's the thinking behind that. And then in 2020, the Rodent Research 19 experiment came back from the International Space Station. And it was this example of genetically enhanced mice. And if you look this up, if you look up the Rodent Research 19 experiment, it's actually adorable because they have these mutant mice, so that these jacked up muscular mice, and then they have these wild type mice. And they have this mutation called the ACVR2 neuromuscular blockade. And they had ground mice and flight mice, and they had wild type and mutants in both groups. And ultimately what ended up happening is that the mutant mice lost less bone density and less muscle mass, which is really critical for a longer duration space flight. So, I like to say tongue in cheek that NASA is engineering Mighty Mouse. But in reality, this is a multidisciplinary, multi-institute project that really is a initial proof of concept in saying, how can we think creatively about addressing hard problems in space medicine, especially for longer duration and exploration class missions?
No, I feel like that's really the beauty of interdisciplinary work. Like you said, you can really find like these creative solutions from people of all sorts of different fields. And it's an idea we truly love and hold dear at Interactum on our podcast. Um, but no, that's amazing. I look forward to hearing more about the mighty mice in space thriving in their journey. Yeah, to go off of the kind of like interdisciplinary nature of your work, I would love to hear about your experience like working on a team with other types of like scientists and engineers. I know that you also wear many hats as a physician, astronaut, aquanaut, and an entrepreneur as well. So I guess like in general, like how do all of these like ideas and skills like coming from different places, like how has that helped you in your career in space medicine and also ultimately accomplish like the different missions that you're a part and initiatives you're part of?
Yeah, I so love that question because it's so important. Even, stripping away every single other experience. And if we just looked at medicine in and of itself, you need to learn to speak what I call multiple languages. Oftentimes, when I sense that, we're not all understanding the same concept, I like to say we're speaking English, but not the same language. So even in medicine, you're interacting with physicians from different fields. You're interacting with nurses, with physiotherapy, occupational therapy, the nutritionist, and the family and the patient. And so, our job is to parse the information in a way that we can use the correct language tailored to our audience, right? So, you have a critical patient in ICU and you're handing over their care to your colleague versus telling the family an update. The same information will ultimately be transmitted, such as this patient is in critical condition and we need to keep a close eye on him. But that might be what you say to the family, whereas, the way you communicate that to your colleague is, this is a 39-year-old male with a white count of 41 who has a temp of 40, is hemodynamically unstable on triple pressor support and broad spectrum antibiotics and ventilatory support, right? You say that to the family, they're not going to understand what you said. And then you say, this guy's in critical shape to your colleague, he's going to wonder if you went to medical school or ever did an ICU rotation in your life. So tailoring your language to your audience and considering who's receiving it, how they'll receive it, and what language they're coming to the table with is really, really critical. And then that translates to everything else I do. So at Luxonic, where we develop the virtual reality-based technologies for medical care, I'm working with devs, I'm working with project managers, I'm working with clinicians, I'm working with the executive team. So that skill really comes in handy. And then same with my astronaut crew for the ISO2 mission, for my aquanaut crews. It's everyone from engineers to Navy dive commander, special operations backgrounds to lawyers. That was the composition of my aquanaut crew. So just a really really smart bunch. And then the other corollaries and the other ways of making teams go from existing to highly performing is looking for ways to be a good teammate. And one of my aquanaut teammates really put this well, is like, my job as a teammate is asking myself, do I make their life better or do I make their life worse? And you never want to be the one who makes the anyone's life worse, but like looking for gaps to fill in. If someone is carrying something and your hands are empty, well, you should share the work. Developing that same mental model for success, and then just checking with each other is really, really critical. And that's how you go from simply existing to kind of having that same goal in mind and performing at a much higher level. And then the final part of that is learning to be honest and vulnerable enough to communicate when you're wrong, and also communicate your pain points where you're struggling, because maybe it's simply a skill set that someone else on your team is very, very strong at. So there's a lot of lessons learned every single day, and continuing to build up that arsenal of performing at a high level is something that's part of my everyday.
That's amazing.
That's so inspiring. Yeah, I would love to be on a team with you. Sounds great.
Yeah, and I think like the advice that or I guess not necessarily advice, but what I've heard other people say too is just like, be a good roommate. right? And I
Yeah.
think that's like kind of a common phrase we can all relate to. But it's really good to hear from you about that, because we also like to talk about interdisciplinary collaboration on this podcast a lot, and we really value hearing those stories. But I do want to shift gears because it's cool, and I'm sure our listeners also want to know, if you're able to talk about your upcoming mission, and then we can sort of close out the podcast.
Yeah, totally. So one thing I will say before we totally switch gears is the other concept when we talk about being a good roommate is NOLS. The National Outdoor Leadership School has this great concept called expeditionary behavior, and NASA and their astronaut corps really embrace that. And it is essentially be a good roommate. And this actually picked up a lot of momentum during the early days of the pandemic, when everyone was forced into an extreme environment and isolation by virtue of world circumstances. And it's simply, look out for each other's health, but also look out for your own health, because if you're kind of crumbling and you don't say something, you're going to become more irritable, or you're going to become less productive, and ultimately the whole family unit, the whole crew is going to suffer. So Knowles has a great laundry list on that, and it's everything from having a sense of humor to communicating your needs, to checking in with each other, to communicating where you're struggling, to just being zen-like. And it's something that we can all work on a little bit every day to make ourselves more cohesive. So now getting to the structure of the ISO2 mission, super excited about this. So it's so nice we're doing it twice. So our ISO1 mission was in with Virgin Galactic on the Galactic 5 mission in November 2023. And we had 3 payloads aboard that flight. So 2 were passive and 1 was active. So that means that 1 required active manipulation and a lot of careful choreography, being mindful of the cabin environment, as well as the other flyers, and deconfliction. So it really is a performance task, because you have a finite amount of time to do something really important with a high quality period of microgravity. It's something that Kelly rehearsed in parabolic flight extensively over and over. She could do it with her eyes closed, backwards, forwards, blindfolded. And then we also had the 2 passive payloads. So the active payload was a fluid cell, basically utilizing the microgravity environment to get a better sense of how fluids react in different configurations in microgravity, and that insight can help inform behavior of fluids in microgravity, and everything from life support systems to medication delivery systems to how fuel sloshes in microgravity. So that the data we got, just seeing my fellow co-PI's face light up, it was actually really, really embodied the joy of discovery in the scientific process. There was a continuous glucose monitor that we flew. I was the PI of that, and that was one of our passive payloads. And the reason is because in orbital flight, we know that even perfectly healthy astronauts can develop pre-diabetic changes, including insulin resistance, and we don't know how quickly that occurs. And also, having diabetes at the agency level is currently a screen-out criterion for those wanting to become astronauts. So demonstrating the safety and efficacy of that device in flight, and we'd previously done that in parabolic flight a year prior, as well as using the extreme environment as a microgravity environment to get a better understanding of the pathophysiology of insulin resistance and glucose metabolism as a surrogate for diabetes in 1G conditions. Those are the key core goals of our that experiment, and so that will be coming out later this year. And then we also had a biomonitoring device, which is famously known as the Astroskin device. So David Saint-Jacques, the lead astronaut, wore it up on the International Space Station in 2018. We, as an institute at IIS, partnered with the Canadian Space Agency to test the device in parabolic flight and get a better sense of what kind of signal to noise there is when a participant is performing light versus hard activity in the microgravity environment. And then with Kelly's flight, this was the first time that we were able to capture biometric data from launch to landings, not just in the microgravity phase of flight, but also in the hypergravity phases of launch and landing and the transitions to microgravity. So that publication is also forthcoming. So all of that is the segue into the lead-in for ISO2. So this will be a multi-researcher mission. So like I said earlier, include myself from Canada, Dr. Nora Patton, engineer from Ireland, and Kelly Girardi from the US, mission operations lead at Palantir from the US. And so our goals are severalfold: to build on some of that research that I just talked about from ISO2, to incorporate new research, and to also really embrace this concept of fly, fix, fly. So using the data generated from ISO1 to further refine some of those payloads, particularly the active payload. And then also to do so more collaboratively and with the greater science community. So this is kind of my tease that we're also going to be issuing a call for partnering payloads with the external science community in the coming weeks as well. So and we'll be finalizing the down select of our science over the next 6 to 12 months. And what's really cool about having the access to the suborbital flight environment as a multi-researcher crew is that we have, through all of our joint experience, we've done some very cool biomedical payloads in parabolic flight that required multiple operators to be able to execute. And it requires a lot of practice, a lot of choreography, a lot of deconfliction, but you can get some really impressive results. So one example of this is we partnered with the biomedical engineering department at the University of Toronto, an amazing lab, and they've developed a handheld bio ink printer that can print synthetic skin as a surrogate for skin grafting. So if you're in an environment where the burns are so severe and you don't have enough skin to graft onto the burn site, or you don't have an OR, or you don't have the skills to graft, for example, in space or in a rural and remote setting, this could potentially be an alternative. And so we got to test the BioInk synthetic skin graft printing device in parabolic flight last year. We worked as a crew. It required a lot of rehearsal, but it is one of my favorite payloads to date because, you know, the implications are so so cool, and just the operational ballet essentially of sequence of events that it took to be able to execute that payload. You know, were really were really rewarding once we were able to get that done. So there's a lot of science that is still going on behind the scenes in the down select, and so that's just a teaser of what could finally be in the final payloads that make it to ISO2.
So exciting.
Cool. Yeah. We are so excited to hear more.
I'm
We're
excited.
looking forward to it.
I will definitely be following all the news that comes out. I'll be watching it very closely. So I'm excited to hear what ends up making it on the flight. So I know we're kind of nearing the end of our time, and I'm sure we both have a ton more questions to ask you, but I want to close with something a bit more broad. And usually I ask for 3, but I'll just ask 1. If you had to give yourself or someone young, potentially thinking about going into space medicine, one piece of advice, what would you give them?
That's a good question. So specifically to space medicine, so the first one's a bit broader, and then the second one may be a bit more specific to space and space medicine. The broad one is don't be so hard on yourself. So I do a lot of mentorship. I work with all of these amazing folks at various stages of their career, in undergrad, med school, high school, and they're so driven. And like me at that age, I would agonize over, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I pursue this, or should I pursue that? And having the luxury of looking at it from the other side and having a number of years of career experience under my belt, it's don't stress the decisions as much, because it's the internal drive to succeed and do amazing things and do so with good people that matters more, because wherever you end up, it's going to be great. And don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up about the roads you didn't take, because it's that fire and that spark in you that really matters. And the way I console myself sometimes is I kind of make believe that there's a version of me in a parallel universe that chose the other path, that's living that other best life. And here I'm living my best astronautic life. So that's kind of the broader piece of advice. And then when it comes to space medicine specifically, is look out for opportunities. This is the best possible time to be involved with space medicine. The whole landscape is changing when it comes to research opportunities, technology advancements, conferences, education and training tracks, and it's changing the world over. So figure out where you want your contribution to be. Do you want it to be in neuroscience, in reproductive health, and technology development, and 3D printing? There's so many opportunities. And if you're not sure, attend conferences. There's so many great conferences out there. The Aerospace Medicine Association conference comes to mind. The World Extreme Medicine Conference, probably one of my favorite conferences of extreme medics. You know, you just meet amazing folks there. And then, you know, just seek out these opportunities, you know, reach out and make contacts. And, you know, that's how I got my start. So I really hope that helps anyone who's thinking about embarking on a career in space medicine.
Wow, that's awesome. And I feel like at the beginning of the podcast, you spoke about like how you got into this field by having a role model. So now I think it's safe to say that it's come full circle and now you're a role model yourself, showing like young people, especially like women, I feel that it's possible to have a career like this. So thank you for your advice.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's been so nice having you on today and getting to know you a bit better. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing all that you do in the future.
Thank you so much. All the best. And we'll see, you know, where we end up in 2026.
Yes, we're looking forward to it.
Yes.
Take care.